Thank you, Chief. Let me first of all start by thanking all of the good men and women of Border Patrol and ICE and CBP who risked their lives. Y'all have an incredibly difficult job. It's an incredibly important job, and an awful lot of times, it's a thankless job. And I want you to know, on behalf of 28 million Texans, we're saying thank you. We appreciate your standing up for this country. We are seeing an absolute humanitarian crisis on the border. This is unconscionable, what is happening. The last month, in the month of May, over 144,000 people were apprehended in 1 month, in a single month. This is a crisis. And unfortunately, this is a man-made crisis. The responsibility for this crisis lies directly on the United States Congress, on loopholes that Congress has put into law that are encouraging far too many people to make this arduous journey. Today, a group of reporters walked 1 mile in the blazing sun, with water, with medical assistance if we needed it. Now imagine doing that if you were a 4-year-old child. Imagine doing that if you were a woman 8 months pregnant. Our policies, the loopholes that Congress has put in place, is encouraging people to risk their lives. And even more tragically, it's putting children in harm's way. Earlier today, I visited the Central Processing Center here in the Valley, visited the McAllen headquarters. One of the more disturbing figures that I heard from the chief is in 2014, not too many years ago, of the adult men crossing illegally into this country, roughly 1% had a child with them. Today, roughly 50% of the adult men crossing into the Rio Grande sector have a child with them. The reason for that, the fault of that, is the U.S. Congress, because we have told the traffickers, the human traffickers, we've told the drug traffickers, if you bring a child, that child is essentially a get-out-of-jail-free card. It is an incentive from the United States Congress. Go and find a small child and take that arduous journey. Risk that child's life. And I'll tell you, far too many of those children face physical abuse, they face sexual abuse, they face neglect. And a growing problem we're seeing is fraudulent family units. Groups that present as a family unit that tell the Border Patrol they're one happy family. There was recently a pilot program done in the Rio Grande Valley using rapid DNA to test family units that said they were family units. It found roughly 30% of those family units were fraudulent. In other words, the adults weren't related to the kids. We're hearing more and more reports of horrific things like children being rented to those crossing illegally. You know, this is a political environment where a lot of politicians like to talk about their enormous compassion, their enormous virtue. Let me tell you, nobody who is compassionate, nobody who is virtuous, nobody who gives a damn about human beings would want even a single day to perpetuate these loopholes and put more children in harm's way. We ought to be angry. We ought to be angry at politicians that wash their hands of this problem. You know, every time I come down to the Valley, every time I come down to the border, I try to visit with Border Patrol agents, I try to visit with law enforcement, local leaders. What I'm hearing in South Texas and all along the border is this is a crisis that is overwhelming our ability to deal with it. It's overwhelming our infrastructure. It's overwhelming our healthcare system. It's overwhelming just here in the Rio Grande Valley. Chief told me that on average, 1 woman a day, they're taken to the hospital to deliver a baby. On average, 1 a day. Imagine being 8-9 months pregnant, making that journey. I visited with too many South Texas ranchers and farmers that have found the bodies of people abandoned, children, pregnant women abandoned to die. It is time to end this crisis, and the only way we'll end this crisis is for Congress to stop the political posturing and solve the problem, close the loopholes so that children are not subject to exploitation as they are right now. With that, we're happy to take questions.
Senator, what did you see at the central processing facility? There's been a lot of talk about the conditions there, that the conditions are bad. What did you see there?
Well, I've been to the central processing facility before. I visited it first in 2014 when it was first constructed. And by the way, I'll say, for all the political rhetoric about cages, that central processing facility was built in 2014 under President Obama. I toured it before it opened, and it was built because we saw then a flood of unaccompanied children coming in. That flood has gotten worse. And what we saw in that facility, what we saw in the McAllen station, is facilities that are meant, I think with the McAllen station, it's 300-400 people it's meant to process. It had 1,100 people in it. It's beyond the capacity for Border Patrol. These Border Patrol agents, let me tell you something amazing. Border Patrol agents are spending 60% of their resources caring for people here illegally. Changing diapers, caring for children. Now, you have to do that. You've got kids in crisis. But you know what? That means these men and women are not able to be out here on the border keeping us safe. It is a symptom of the problem. And, you know, I watched last week the Democratic debates where you saw Democratic presidential contender, one after the other, saying, well, they just empty the cages. That was their favorite rhetoric. What do you do with 144,000 people with little children? None of these Democratic contenders are saying that you can't exactly throw children out in the street. It is not humane to continue policies that put more and more children at risk, that subject them to these conditions. And we shouldn't just accept empty talking points. We should demand real solutions so that we're not incentivizing children being put in harm's way.
Senator Cruz?
Yeah.
You're talking about Congress needing to close loopholes. What exactly?
Like in the instructions earlier, we need to keep the questioning to the Border Safety Initiative and the things you guys saw today as far as border security operations. So if you guys could, for now, with the chiefs up here, let's stick to that line of questioning.
Okay, in regards to what you saw today, what do you think that you could take back to Congress that will help make a difference, or at least put a dent?
The most important piece to stopping this humanitarian crisis is ending the practice of catch and release. Catch and release is a practice that is effectively mandated by Congress. It's also mandated by a court decision called the Flores decision, which is being exploited by the traffickers to say if you bring a child, you'll be forced to be released. We need to end that so that we don't have catch and release. And let me point out to everyone here, we don't have to ask theoretically, can we solve this problem? We know we can solve it, and we've seen it. We've seen it in very recent history. In the first half of 2017, we saw the rates of illegal crossings drop nearly 70%. It was a staggering drop in illegal traffic across the border. And I remember being down here early in 2017, meeting with Border Patrol agents and asking them, say, look, the new president had just been elected. We hadn't built a wall. We hadn't hired new agents. It had been so quick that there was very little time for much to have changed. So I would ask Border Patrol agents, all right, what has happened to see illegal crossings drop 70%? And what I heard over and over again, they said the only thing that has changed is that the cartels and traffickers believe now the administration will enforce the law. That if you're apprehended, you'll be detained and you'll be returned home. And it's simply the fact that they believe the law would be enforced, they stopped coming. So what went wrong? Well, what went wrong is because of the congressional loopholes, because of the Flores decision, people were apprehended and then they were released. They're given a court date sometime in the future. Far too many of them never show up. And inevitably what they do is they call home. They talk to their friends and family and say, hey, you know what? Same thing is happening. If you get here, you get released and you get to stay forever. And that's what causes people to come. So if we want to solve this problem, we don't have to ask theoretically how to solve it. We've seen how to solve it. The way to solve it is enforce the laws, and that means ending catch and release and not encouraging illegal immigration. We know that works because we've seen it work, but too many in Congress are unwilling to make the decisions to implement it.
Chief, a lot of talk about, this being a humanitarian crisis. People are sick. People inside Ursula are sick, and maybe they got there sick or maybe they got sick there. But what do you need, either with this money you're getting from Congress, what do you need on the ground here to make sure that people don't get sick or that they get care more quickly so that they don't get sick and go to the hospital?
Right. Well, I will tell you, on average, my agents do about 30 hospital runs per day going into McAllen. So I think anything that we can collectively bring to that table is to keep people healthy. But there are a lot of people that are traveling to the United States right now that are already ill and infirm. Many times we won't know about it. They're not showing any signs of it. But I will show you just how dedicated we are to it. We have one Border Patrol station right now that we've dedicated as an infirmary for quarantine because of all of the illnesses that we've seen. I've asked the governments of Central American countries is to work with Mexico to at least do vaccinations on their southern borders to actually improve this. We are seeing every infirmity that you can name, from mumps to TB to scabies, you name it, our agents are seeing it. But every day we deal with it. We have 3 stages of medical screening that happen right now. Initially in the field when they're first encountered by Border Patrol agents, when they actually make it to our facilities, where either doctors or nurse practitioners do it, and then after, when they're getting ready to be released, there is actually another screening process that occurs. In the meantime, if anybody complains about having a fever, about feeling sick, we are actually transporting to the hospital. I also would like to talk to you about one of the earlier comments that you made mention in regards to the facilities. I think there are a lot of people spreading some very disingenuous comments about that because first of all, recognize is our facilities are processing stations. They're not long-term detention facilities, but we're mothers, we're fathers. We do our best is to take care of anyone that we have in our custody, meaning that we try to provide for them, feed them. My bill right now at the CPC is about $85,000 per month in just maintaining that operationally. My food bill for this sector is about $1.2 million per month of what we're actually providing for on the feeding realm. So I don't think a lot of people truly recognize what we're doing on that front is to care for people. We do have contracts in place is for sponsors to come in and help us watch and care for unaccompanied children. But during the hours of darkness, it's the men and women who are in a green, a blue uniform that are actually holding a child, that are actually changing a diaper, that are actually feeding them. So I think that we should not lose sight of that when we start to point fingers, because at the end of the day, these men and women are all law enforcement officers, but they're still stepping up above and beyond what it says in their position description is to help other people out.
Chief, do we have a specific number of deaths so far this fiscal year?
I don't have the exact specific number, but you witnessed last week we had 12 deaths in this area. All very tragic, very unfortunate that they happen. Nobody wants to see death occur on the border. But imagine if you're crossing that river in a raft that doesn't have enough air, there's too much weight on it, what could potentially happen? You saw the pictures of the mother and father there who drowned in Brownsville. Just west of here in Andelzuas the other day, mothers who left their children out here in the desert area. Nobody wants to see this, but once again, part of this border safety initiative is to also educate them. Please don't do this. There is a way for you to come into the country, and that is through a port of entry. Don't put your hands or your life in the hands of a smuggler who does not care about you. He is just interested in making money. he will leave you out in the desert to die. So ultimately, we all have to try to do our best to educate them. Yeah.
¿Lo puede hacer en español un poco?
Un poquito. ¿Tiene usted una pregunta?
Adelante, no, yo creo que un resumen breve.
Sí, nosotros solo estamos hablando de los riesgos aquí de cruzar la frontera y todos los retos que tenemos nosotros. Abajo de todo es la responsabilidad también de adultos que tienen niños que no deben cruzar en una área como este o por el río. Hay otros medios de entrar al país, pero nosotros todos también tenemos que pensar que hay consecuencias para las acciones de nosotros. Had a question over here.
Yeah, what's the recent numbers? Senator Cruz mentioned 50% of adult males
Yeah.
have a child. What
Yeah.
are the recent numbers on fake families? And also the DNA testing, is that coming back to the Valley?
Well, we've done a pilot test with Homeland Security Investigations. I absolutely want to see it come back. But once again, this is something that they'll have to roll out through the country. I think there's tremendous benefit in it because there are a lot of people. As a matter of fact, when we actually did the rapid DNA, you'd be surprised at the number of families who actually came up and said, this is not my child. So we've had over 1,200 interviews here in this sector alone. We've discovered a number of fraudulent family units that we're seeking prosecutions on because once again, they're exploiting our immigration laws by knowing is that we're not going to be able to hold on to them for a period of time and wanting to is to explore a loophole in the laws. Yes.
Let me amplify two things. Number one of the most disturbing things I heard today meeting with Border Patrol is because of the congressional loopholes and because of Flores, they've been forced to release groups that are presenting as family units and subsequently have discovered that the adults have had criminal sexual convictions, were pedophiles. Now, if you focus for a minute on the combination of incentivizing people to have fraudulent family units, to take a child that is not theirs, and you combine that with a legal system that says if you have a child, you get let go, we are putting children in a position to be horribly abused. That's wrong. That is immoral. And let me say, secondly, there was a question earlier about health conditions. One of the things I hear consistently in South Texas and across the state is concerns about the health conditions, concerns about people coming in with flu symptoms, with other communicable diseases. And I will say that that is a growing problem, and it's a problem Congress is exacerbating. You know, we just had a border supplemental that passed $4.6 billion in additional funds. I'm glad those resources are going to CBP and ICE to help respond to this crisis. But one of the things that congressional Democrats are pushing for is strict caps on the beds that ICE has available. Now, the chief mentioned CBP is not long-term detention. It's meant to be processing. And when Congress caps the number of beds, what you're saying is we're not going to give you a bed, a place to care for someone who comes over. As a consequence, they've got adults in the McAllen station that have been there 40 days when they should be being processed in just a day or two. And one of the real consequences of that, when you have 1,100 people packed into a facility that was built to process 300 people, you end up with people all but stacked up on each other. And when it comes to communicable diseases, when you have people crammed in spaces that are smaller than were meant for them, one of the things the chief talked about is he said, look, in this crowd, if someone in the back there has a fever, is sick, and we can't see in the back because there's so many people crowded in there. That's how you end up with the spread of disease. That's how tragically you end up with people's lives being imperiled. So it is not humane to cap the bed space at ICE. Instead, you ought to have people in humane detention, and you ought to expedite asylum proceedings so that you can have legal proceedings, and those people who do not meet the legal standards for asylum should be returned to their homes as quickly as possible.
Let's try to gear this as much as possible. I know that there's a lot of questions in regard